Okay, I'm going to start admitting people in a couple seconds. It might take just a little bit for everyone to get in, but it should be up and running and you'll see their names pop up.
Okay.
But you shouldn't see their video. Okay, I'm going to start admitting people in a couple seconds. It might take just a little bit for everyone to get in, but it should be up and running and you'll see their names pop up.
Okay.
But you shouldn't see their video.
Very well. If I do that, then I can make it bigger for you.
So we're welcoming people as they pop on. We'll give it a couple minutes. People as they pop on.
Excuse me.
By the way, Joe, I actually grew up in Newcomerstown, so I'm
Okay, I'm going to start admitting people in a couple seconds. It might take just a little bit for everyone to get in, but it should be up and running and you'll see their names pop up.
Okay.
But you shouldn't see their video.
Very well. If I do that, then I can make it bigger for you.
So we're welcoming. We're getting a lot of people joining. We'll give it a couple
wonderful.
minutes. Just give it a couple more minutes here. Give people time to get on. People as they pop on.
Excuse me.
By the way, Joe, I actually grew up in Newcomerstown, so I'm
Okay, I'm going to start admitting people in a couple seconds. It might take just a little bit for everyone to get in, but it should be up and running and you'll see their names pop up.
Okay.
But you shouldn't see their video.
They're up and running.
All right.
I've shared it on Facebook.
Okay. So, everybody ready? Can we get started here?
Sure.
All right. I'm Joe Sexton. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're glad you got the information to be able to sign on, and also glad that you have the interest in learning as much as you can about what's going on, as it changes every day or almost by hour. So the Chamber of Commerce wanted to make available to you the detail for the businesses and the things that are available to you now, and the things we probably won't have all the answers, but we hope to get on the right track and be able to follow up if we need to. Maribeth Wright is going to be monitoring or facilitating the discussion today. And so I'm just going to get started here. I know you're all interested in getting the information. We have about 90 minutes. And if you can stay for that whole thing, that's wonderful. If not, we'll have some follow-up answers to some things that we need to research a little bit further. And I want to thank Bricker Eckler for coordinating the Zoom conference. They can take up to 1,000 people on here. So I don't know if we'll have quite that many, but I know we have quite a few. So Maribeth from Wright & Associates, thank you for agreeing to facilitate this, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I normally, when I do these Zooms, I don't do the video part of it. So who knows what I will unconsciously do. Anyway, I'm Maribeth Wright, and I'm a CPA, and I'm a principal with Wright & Associates here in the Cambridge office. And I've been in practice for 40 years, both on the tax side and accounting. And as Joe said, I'm going to be the moderator for today's presentation. There is a lot of information coming at us daily and is really changing by the minute. I'm sure that when we get off of this Zoom presentation, that most of us presenting today will have about another 20 emails on updates or changes. Our panel of experts in the respective fields will be spending the next 90 minutes to bring you the most current facts. And we will be having questions and answers, so just go ahead and post your questions to the Zoom group chat, and we will get those answered as best we can. Starting off our program today are John and Cindy Voorhies of the Small Business Development Center. John is an entrepreneurial and a business advisor with more than 46 years of business experience in management and small business ownership. He's a certified business advisor through Kent State University, and he's worked with the Small Business Development Center for 19 years as a counselor. His lovely counterpart is an advisor within the Small Business Development Center at the Ohio University's Voinovich Center of Leadership and Public Affairs. And that covers 3 counties, Muskingum, Guernsey, and Belmont. Cindy has experience in counseling and assisting small business owners within the Ohio Small Business Development Network since 2000. So I'm going to turn it over to you two to go ahead and start with your presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you. We appreciate it. So we've been getting several calls, emails, Zoom meetings, asking about all these questions about the different types of programs. So I thought I would give a quick overview of some of the just brief information on the different programs, and then John will go into some of the more details of them. So one of the first programs that they came out with was the EIDL. This program was through the SBA website. Then they changed the program a little bit to where there was, I don't even know how the right word to say, but there was a grant that you could get for $10,000.
Up to.
Well, in reality, this is not necessarily a grant that you get the full $10,000. It is where you can get up to $10,000. So we had a lot of calls with people wanting to know how to get that $10,000 grant. And it's really not as easy as just going and applying for a $10,000 grant. We apply for the EIDL loan through the SBA's disaster website. And then they determine the amount of that, what they're calling an advance, that we could get up to $10,000. And then they came out with a PPP program. And the PPP program has a lot of questions, and I know we're going to go into more detail about that one. This one is for the paychecks. So if anybody needs payroll dollars that they're submitting to get reimbursement for their payroll, the PPP program through their local bank is the one that they would use for this. And John's going to go into more detail. Then they started an SBA bridge loan program. This one was supposed to be $25,000 or less, no collateral. And again, you went to a bank. We haven't heard a lot more about that one, but I've still been getting a few questions off and on, but that one's just kind of been hanging out there and we haven't got a lot more information about it recently. And then we have the SBA Small Business Debt Relief Program. These are the programs from the SBA. The debt relief program is saying that if you have a 7A, 504, or an SBA microloan, that they are going to forgive some of your payments up to 6 months, that the SBA will cover 6 months of your payments for you. So now, John, why don't you talk a little bit more about the PPP program and the EIDL?
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and break it down. Let's start with the EIDL. The EIDL, the Emergency Disaster Relief, was put into place several weeks back when we were designated a disaster state. That loan program is designed to help you get through the short term of helping you with your bills. For instance, it's going to be like leases, taxes. It is strictly for helping you pay those fixed bills, those fixed operational bills that you can't cover because of loss of sales. It does not cover loss of sales. It's just going to allow you to have it. It's basically based around an 8 to 10 week period. Anyone can apply for it. Even nonprofits can apply for it. Now, this loan process is going through, as Cindy said, through the SBA. The SBA doesn't normally loan money. They secure money through banks. In this case, this is an actual loan with the Small Business Association. You do have to file for it online. You are going to have to do just like you would normally do in a regular loan. You're going to have to supply profit and loss statements for last year, current profit and loss up to this year. You're going to have your latest tax returns. They're going to look at your list of expenses. The amount, as Cindy said, they changed it. What the original was going to be, did not have that forgiveness point. What they've done now, and if you have applied, you can reapply if you didn't get the question, because you are eligible for up to $10,000. Now, here's the question. As of right now, it looks like, and we're still trying to nail that down. It looks like that $10,000 is going to be based on your employee. So in other words, right now it looks like it's going to be $1,000 per employee. But so if you have one employee, it's going to be $1,000 that they're going to give you. But it is a grant. In other words, it does not have to be paid back, and you do not have to necessarily be qualified to make the loan. In other words, if you go into the process and they grant you that money, even if you're turned down for the EIDL, that money is still considered a grant. It's basically money to help you get through with short-term payroll taxes, things like that. It is a grant. The rest of it is a standard loan. The loan itself is a 3.75 loan up to $2 million. And the terms are based on the need. I will tell you that don't get too excited, because some people are thinking, oh, gee, I'm going to get this, I'll be able to borrow a lot of money. No, it's pretty much based around that 8 to 10 week period. I've had just today, I had a $2 million company that was allocated $18,000. Because that's what their fixed expenses were for that short period of time. So they didn't get the big money that they were hoping for. They were allotted the $10,000. So like I said, but they had many employees. But that's essentially, that's the up to $10,000 is the only part that's a grant. The rest of it's a loan. So bear in mind that is a loan for a specific period at 3.75%. The checks come directly from the United States Treasury. So in other words, it's coming straight from the government. The secondary plan that came in was called the PPP. That was allocated back, it was signed into law Saturday, and then it took till like Thursday night before they actually worked all the details. The PPP is a plan that goes through local banks. The local banks are, not all of them are participating. The banks that are participating have to be what we call 7A or 504 SBA lenders. Some banks who are not have actually applied to be that. It is designed to be a short-term, quick turnaround, where a EIDL might take 3 to 6 weeks. The PPP can be turned around in 3 to 4 days if the bank is up to speed. And sometimes banks are a little slow right now. Like I said, they're still working through some of the details. That is essentially for payroll, and that, as the term says, it's a payroll protection. The point here is that if you are going to maintain your employees and not lay them off, this money is based on that, so you can keep them employed. Even if you're not working them, you can still pay them. The up to 75% has got to go to payroll, though. That amount will be forgiven if it's used appropriately in payroll. The amount varies based on, essentially what they're due is you're going to take your payroll. If you look at your profit and loss from last year, look at your payroll, divide it by 12 and multiply it by 2.5%. And that's going to give you an idea of what kind of loan you're going to be eligible for. The terms on it is 1% for 2 years. And like I said, if you use it for payroll and appropriately, then that will be forgiven. But I do want to point out that all of these things, just in case you realize, these are loans. So when I say they can be forgiven, I'm not saying that they will be forgiven. Okay, so you have to follow all the obligations and make sure that it's done properly. I did find out as of the 10th that 1099 employees and self-employed people can apply for this. And there was some question that, because there are many people who don't take out, if you're an LLC, you don't necessarily pay yourself a payroll. You may do draws. Well, what they're saying now is that if you are in the draw situation that many banks are looking at, what they're going to do is they will say, okay, they'll look at your overall income up to $100,000 and then divide it by 12 and do the same 2.5%. But that being said, there will be a lot more proof needed. You can't say that, well, I drew out all this amount of money. There'll be more hoops to go through. And I will also tell you that not all banks are participating in the PPP.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh,
My watch.
okay. Well, Siri just answered me. But and not all banks are participating. So, and here's another thing, because it's going through local banks can put their own twist on it. Some banks are saying we're not going to loan to anybody who's not an existing customer with us. Some banks are saying if you have a past amount with us, or if you had some issues in the past, we're not going to loan to you. Ultimately, what it boils down to is all of these are loans. You are going to have to provide the same kind of information that you normally would in a loan. The difference would be that, like in anything 25,000 or less is not going to require collateral, which is kind of a new thing. Anything over $25,000, they will want collateral, but the collateral is not as stringent as it was. In other words, they'll take second, third positions on things. The asset doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of equity built up in it. So they're kind of working with that. The people who I've seen turned down so far are people who had very low credit scores.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the things that I'm coming across is they're just not sure which loan to apply for.
right.
Do they apply for the EIDL loan or do they apply for the PPP? So if 75% of the requested amount of funds needed are not for payroll purposes, then the EIDL loan is the way to go.
Don't do the PPP.
Correct. So that answers a few questions. Myself, in my business, I'll be applying for the EIDL loan because we were closed before all of the information came out for the PPP program, and I laid my staff off. So I'm not paying payroll. So I will be applying for the EIDL loan because I don't have payroll to apply for. So if that helps anyone, and if there's a sole proprietor out there, just the individual person, lawn care, auto mechanic, it doesn't matter, hairstylist, the EIDL loan seems to be the route that we're recommending that they go because they don't have the payroll to apply for the PPP program.
But like I said, if you are self-employed and it's just you can apply for the PPP program. You just have to show what your income is. So that'll be the rub. And
we can also help navigate through those individual circumstances. If anybody does have particular detailed questions and more confidential, we can help them through those navigations. And then I also see here we've had some questions about the nonprofits. And yes, they can also apply for the PPP program as well as the EIDL loan.
You can apply for both, but here's where you also be careful too. For instance, if you apply for the EIDL and you are granted, say you get that whole $10,000, and then you go apply for the PPP and you're expecting it to whole be forgiven. No, you can't double dip. The PPP will deduct the $10,000 you got free from the EIDL from the forgiven part of the PPP. So yeah, they're going to kind of watch and make sure that we're not double dipping into the system. Essentially, the thing I guess we want to point out to is at the Small Business Development Center, we are a free service, free to our businesses, and we're confidential. So feel free, and when we're out of this crunch and stuff, we're here to help you with your building your business. So I'm going to give you my email address, and then there's one of us in every county in the United States, including Puerto Rico. So, we're here to help you. But I want to give you my email address, and then I will, because like I cover the southern counties, Cindy covers the counties in Guernsey, Belmont, and Muskingum. I cover the southern counties, and we go, but like I said, we're all over. So I'm going to give you my email. It's pretty simple. It's Voorhies, that's V as in victory, OORHIES @ohio.edu, and send me an email. I'll put it to the people who are working in the area you're working, and we'll answer your questions. We'll help talk you through it.
Right. And just to make sure and clarify, to apply for the EIDL loan, you would go to the SBA disaster website and apply through that channel. To apply for the PPP program, you will go to one of the banks
Local
that's
bank.
accepting the applications for those.
Turnaround on the EIDL, like I said, 3 to 6 weeks. Turnaround if you're granted that up to $10,000, is supposed to be 3 to 4 days. Turnaround on the PPP, if you can get in, is supposed to be 3 or 4 days. Here's a warning. As of last night, the PPP program has already put out 71 billion with a B dollars. So if you're not in the pipeline or getting the pipeline pretty soon, they allocated, a pretty big hunk of money, but they've already went through it in just a few days. So my suggestion, if you decide to go with the PPP, get in the pipeline because the money's going pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Looking to see if there's any questions we can answer quickly.
I did.
Did we get them all?
Mhm.
Okay. So that's about us. Anybody got any questions for us? You're muted.
I'm mute. I know.
I saw your lips moving, and I'm not really good at reading lips. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I hit the wrong. So there's
Were
a
you
chat-
able to see the chats that came through, or do I need to read those to you?
You need to
I'm
read them.
kind of looking at them a little bit, but
Okay. One question was, can a sole proprietor that's an LLC, just him, what loan options would be best?
it depends on what he's doing. Is he active or is he completely shut down? As far as I guess the best way to look at it, if he's going to use the money for operating expenses, the EIDL. If he wants to cover payroll, it's just himself and he wants to pay himself, he's allowed to do that. I think you can file on the 10th. I believe this Friday is when you're allowed to start filing for that through the PPP. So PPP is for payroll, EIDL is for
Operating and other expenses.
But now I want to point out that these are short-term. In other words, they're going to loan you enough money to get you through 8 to 10 weeks. After that, there may be a reapplication process that we'll see what's going on. But don't expect these big amount of money. You cannot use this money for things like, gee, I'll use this to buy another piece of equipment, or I'll pay off another loan because it's a lower debt, or I'll go ahead and buy that piece of land. No, it's not for that. It's strictly for the usage of the expenses that you can't cover because you're closed, or to cover payroll. So those are the two things.
Okay. That's good to know, because it does have the trickle down effect. If you
It
can't
does.
pay your rent, then somebody else is going to.
Exactly. Oh, I do want to point out too that the SBA and the government, the feds themselves, has put out an awful lot of information, and many of our creditors and people who you are, your wholesalers, your suppliers, many of them are giving you deferments. Utilities are giving deferments. Your loan officer, if you have a current SBA loan, those are being deferred. Now, the key about deferred, it doesn't mean it just goes away. It just means it usually gets packed on the end. Or it's either packed on the end and adds on longer term, or they may redo the amortization to allow for what is going through. And it's usually a short term. Most of them are 90-day deferments, but that is available. So sometimes if you say, well, I'm not sure I really want to get a loan, I've got a little bit of money, sometimes call everybody and say, hey, will you work with me till I get back to work? Sometimes it might help you save, because like I said, these are loans. And until you get forgiven for the PPP, or if you don't use the EIDL, I mean, there's, I'm just saying they're loans.
Yeah, personally, I had a situation where, we recently opened up another salon last 3 years. And so that loan payment to get that done, they cut that down to 10%. So I don't have to make the full loan payment. I'm just making not even the interest, just 10% of the loan for 3 months.
So instead of 1,200, we're paying 100, praise God.
So
it helps.
So I'm recommending to all the clients when I speak with them, call your vendors. Call everybody that you owe money to, and see what they're able to do and work with you on. Have that be step number one. Create that monthly budget. So I've created myself a spreadsheet with all of my bills that are due, and then what I'm paying in April, what that total amount's going to be, May, what that total amount's going to be, June, and then where I'm going to be ramped back up in July at full speed. What the difference is, and then if my vendors are working with me, okay. If not, then I know what I have to have in that budget in those months.
Cindy, on the mortgage payments, if they are making adjustments, are they tacking that on to the end of the loan, or do you have to double up payments then when everything gets ramped up?
No, this particular one, they are just going to tack that on to the end of the loan for me. And I'm sure each one's going to do it a little differently.
It'll be up to them to make that call.
I
So
actually-
negotiate.
I actually have two different shopping plazas that were located in. The one shopping plaza is not really wanting to work with us much. They will kind of let me make up April's payment as I go along, but they're going to expect May's in full. And then the other shopping plaza said, look, you're closed. You're not going to owe us anything until you get back open. So it just depends on the vendor and what their ability is to do.
It's funny, the ones that won't work with is the one that has billions of dollars
it's a lot
of
bigger one.
property and probably could be the best to afford it, but
That's the way it goes. We just roll with it.
yeah, just roll with it.
Okay, that's good information. Here's one about the not-for-profits. And it says, I believe you already answered it, that yes, they are eligible for the EIDL. And emphasizing again, because it's coming through that they're eligible for the grant. But as we just discussed, all of this is loans with the potential to be forgiven as a grant.
And that 10,000
The
is
10,000 will be a grant. If it's granted
Okay.
that, whatever it is, yeah.
it's up to the 10,000. They may not get the full 10,000.
I do want to say too, that I've been working with a nonprofit. In fact, just this morning, People's Bank Theater in Marietta, and they have a for-profit and a nonprofit side. So, and you're allowed for each EIN to apply. So we literally are working one where one is applying for this, and you can apply for both, but like I said, you can't double dip. Whatever you get from one will be affecting the other.
Yeah.
But in this case, where if you have employees and you want to keep them, then you'll definitely apply for the PPP. Go ahead and do the EIDL. I think what we're hearing from all the people at the SBA is that throw it on the wall and whatever sticks we'll work with. So just if you when in doubt, apply.
Yes.
The worst they can say is no. So just get out there and get it all. And if they do say yes, then great, you got it. And like I said, you do not have to accept it. If you get into a position where things are getting better and you're approved for it, you don't have to take the money if you don't want to.
And there's no pre-penalty payoff if you pay it off
Nope.
early. So
Okay. Where do you apply for the EIDL? That's on the,
on the SBA's disaster website,
I think let me see. It is. I should.
it's there. If you just Google SBA disaster, the website comes right up for you.
Yeah, it's COVID-19 relief.gov.
Yeah.
/ // But yeah, it's COVID-19 relief.gov, and then if you get that in there, Google it will take you there. And the process is simple. It's just answer the questions. If you would like a copy of it, if you email me, I actually have a copy of the application.
process.
You will not get an immediate response. It's like that's your portal. You do want to check the box that says you'll get that $100,000 or up to $10,000. Yeah, I wish. But you want to check that box, and then they will let you know quickly about that, 3 to 4 days. But after you get through the portal, then they will then assign you a person who will then contact you, and they'll ask some clarification questions. For instance, like they'll ask you questions like you would normally ask if you were kind of verifying, we have these 3 addresses, which one fits you, kind of thing. They're going to ask some questions that you're going to verify your information that it is you actually, not, somebody in China. And then once you pass through that, then they will start working with you directly.
And that's when you will upload all of the supporting documentations, your profit and loss statements and so forth.
Like you guys who are in the accounting business, just make sure you've got everyone's information in a Acrobat PDF, and then you'll just upload and go with that.
okay. Do they have a schedule yet on when they will expect the repayment process to start?
A year.
12 the
months.
EIDL is 1 year. The PPP is 6 months. So they're going to defer the payment. So you have up to 6 months before you have to make the first payment on the PPP, 1 year before you have to make the first payment on the EIDL.
Okay, and what is the FDA website?
FDA?
F as in Frank, FDA website.
I have no idea what that is. SDA?
FDA. It's right-
FDA.
FDA.
What is the F?
I think somebody just misheard SBA. I think.
Oh,
that
okay, I'm
you-
sorry.
Okay.
All right, sorry.
Okay,
I think
I have a
that's the
list.
website.
That count?
they entered it.
Yeah, okay.
They put it right there for us.
All right.
If you apply for the EIDL and you're granted $15,000, can you keep just the $10,000 as a grant and not use the other $5,000?
So how that's going to work is they will advance you within 3 days after all the application process is done and you're approved. That advance you'll get within 3 days, probably 3 days to a week into your account automatically. And then the rest of it would be considered the loan, and you'll know that within 3 to 6 weeks following that. If you do not choose to take the loan amount or all of it, then that's fine. You don't have to. But that advance will already be in your account.
But no, you can't say, well, I'll just take my 10,000 out of that.
Yeah, because
No.
you may not get the full 10,000
Yeah, it's not like that. If it's granted you, it's going to be granted you, and that is the
in
grant
that
only.
advance.
The rest is a loan.
Okay. All right. If any more questions? Okay. John and Cindy will be on till the end of the program. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very informative, and you weren't kidding when you said that you could have used the whole hour and a half. So
Yeah, it's a lot.
yeah, there's a lot of information. So appreciate you participating today, and please hang around because I'm sure there will be more questions as we go on. Our next section has to do with employment law issues. This is presented by Bricker and Eckler. Liz Stock is an attorney, and she specializes in business employment and related issues. She's experienced in handling a wide range of employment issues such as Family Medical Leave Act compliance, reasonable accommodation issues, wage and hour matters, and disciplinary issues. Liz frequently provides training on HR topics. Hello, Liz.
Hello.
Brock, and I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. Sorry here, Brock. Brock Miskimen is also an attorney with Bricker and Eckler. His specialization is government relations, and he's here today to give a brief overview of the potential reimbursements from the U.S. Department of Health and also Human Services under the CARE Act, as well as from FEMA under the Emergency Declaration. So they're going to be covering the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, employment law issues. I'm sure we're all seeing a lot of those come up. And also employment law issues implicated when screening employees for COVID-19, including what your confidentiality requirements are. So at this time, I will turn it over to Liz and Brock.
Thank you. Brock, why don't you go ahead and start with your topics, and then I'll pick up after that.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce for organizing this today, and Maribeth for moderating. As our previous panelists discussed, the CARES Act had the PPP program in it. One of the other programs in there was the Public Health and Social Services Emergency Fund, and this would be kind of geared towards any healthcare providers that we have today that may be viewing this. Money set aside for this was they appropriated $100 billion to prevent, prepare, and respond to the coronavirus. Reimbursements would be for necessary expenses to eligible healthcare providers for healthcare related expenses or lost revenues. I think a key there is lost revenues attributed to the coronavirus. Eligible healthcare providers are public entities, Medicare and Medicaid enrolled suppliers and providers, and such nonprofit and for-profit entities that the Secretary of Health and Human Services may specify. And all of those entities that provide diagnoses, testing, or care for individuals with COVID-19 would be eligible. We're still waiting on a lot of the details, how this is going to work. Healthcare providers would apply to apparently, most likely, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for this reimbursement. I was on their website earlier this morning and haven't seen exactly how all the details are going to be rolled out. It's kind of similar how the SBA rolled out a lot of the details last week. So we're waiting to see how that's going to work. Another avenue for a lot of healthcare providers and other governmental entities would be to apply to FEMA for funding. And here in Ohio, that's run through the State of Ohio Emergency, or EMA. Reimbursement would be for eligible emergency protective measures taken to respond to the COVID-19 emergency at the direction or guidance of public health officials. However, FEMA will not duplicate assistance provided by the CDC or Health and Human Services or other federal agencies. Kind of similar how, our previous speakers talked about, if you apply for one loan or you apply for that loan. So they're not going to duplicate. However, FEMA is not going to reimburse you for lost revenue. However, the Health and Human Services, that was included in that one. So it's kind of, you're going to have to keep good records of everything, kind of sort things out, and just kind of work with both FEMA and the Health and Human Services to figure out what's reimbursable under what program. And I know in the FEMA application, it says, they'll coordinate with Health and Human Services to try to help determine that. The FEMA reimbursement, those entities that would be eligible would be state, local, and certain private nonprofit organizations would be eligible. Types of reimbursements would be for management, control, and reduction of immediate threats to public health and safety. For instance, if you had to disinfect a public facility afterwards, whether, that's a school or a hospital or whoever, that would be eligible for disinfecting your facility. For training, let's say you had to bring in a bunch of people and you had to do some cross training to get people up to speed on how to care for people with COVID-19, if that's not your, typical area of practice of medicine, whether it's, doctors or nursing or whoever on your healthcare staff. Emergency medical care, a common one that falls under this category that we hear a lot about, that there's a shortage, would be personal protective equipment. That would be an example of something that a healthcare provider could get reimbursed under FEMA. Temporary medical facilities, you're seeing a lot of, we don't necessarily have potentially enough hospital space, so they're looking at turning other facilities into medical care facilities. So if you're a healthcare provider, those expenses could be covered under FEMA. Emergency medical transport, medical sheltering when existed facilities are becoming overloaded, as we discussed. So security and law enforcement or other communications that may go along with that. Those are all examples of things that could potentially be reimbursed under FEMA. They have an application process. As I mentioned earlier, the state is handling that for the feds. So contact the state EMA for potential reimbursement. And then also one other thing that does apply to, some hospitals, maybe public hospitals, as healthcare providers. The state legislature did pass last week House Bill 197 to allow public bodies, which typically like city council, county commissioners, stuff like that, but some hospitals are public hospitals, to allow those boards to meet via teleconference and video conferencing. And that's something that we can assist with at Bricker, to have a program to allow for the public to interact and allow for that public body to go into executive session. Liz, your turn.
All right, sorry, getting myself off mute. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here with you all today. As Maribeth mentioned, I'm an employment attorney, so I've been fielding a ton of questions on a wide range of employment law issues. The most recent topic and where I'm going to start is with the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That federal law that went into effect on April 1st, and just last week, the Department of Labor issued some regulations to provide some clarification around some of the questions that had come up. Let me just, not sure where everybody is at in terms of how much they've been paying attention, so I'll do a high-level overview of the basics. But the FFCRA did two things. Number one, it expanded the Family Medical Leave Act, and two, it created a new emergency paid sick leave act. So it sort of has two components. Both went into effect on April 1st. Both cover employers who have fewer than 500 employees. So if you have 500 or more employees, neither of these apply to you. There is a limited exception for businesses with fewer than 50 employees. And I'll talk about where that limit comes into play. And my screen froze up on me here. The new regulations, the new department regulations list the 3 requirements that a small business needs to meet in order to show that it's exempt. And this exemption only applies for, let me get into the types of leave, and I'll call out where the exemption comes in when I get there. So assuming you are a covered employer, the expanded FMLA applies to any employee who has worked for you for 30 or more days. The emergency paid sick leave is, any employee starting on day 1 is eligible for that. There is an exception there. Employers can exclude employees who are healthcare providers or emergency responders, which the Department of Labor has defined very broadly. Just to note that if you do have healthcare providers or emergency responders that you're excluding, you are still required to post the Department of Labor's poster that talks about employees' rights under the FFCRA. I got my computer up here, so the exception for small businesses, if you are under 50, an authorized officer of the organization needs to determine and then document one of the following 3 things. Either that the granting leave would result in expenses and financial obligations exceeding available revenues and cause the organization to cease operating, that the employee's absence and providing paid leave would entail a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the organization because of this employee's specialized skills and business knowledge, or that there are just not enough workers who are able, willing, and qualified to perform the work that is being provided by the employee who's seeking the leave, and then that employee's services are needed in order for the business to operate in a minimal capacity. So it's a pretty high threshold. I will also share that those requirements and a lot of the other topics I'm going to cover today are laid out in a really helpful Q&A that the Department of Labor has published and that is available on the Department of Labor's website. That website is www.dol.gov/coronavirus. If you go to that website, you can get a copy of the Department of Labor's FFCRA poster, and there's a Q&A about that poster, and then a Q&A about the FFCRA generally, and there are about 70-ish questions. They continue to add new Q&A almost daily, so check back on that regularly. So assuming you are covered by the FFCRA, what it requires is under the FMLA expansion piece, that you provide 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks of leave, to paid leave, to an employee to care for their child if they need time off work because their child's school or care provider is unavailable. That's a qualifying reason for leave under the expanded FMLA. The 10 weeks of that are paid. The first 2 weeks are unpaid. However, the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act provides the pay for that time. So in practice, it amounts to 12 weeks of paid time off, up to 12 weeks. And that's paid at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate for a max of $200 a day. So that is the only reason for leave under the expanded FMLA. And if you are a business with fewer than 50 employees, that's the portion that you can be exempt from. The emergency paid sick leave provides for up to 2 weeks, 80 hours for full-time employees, of paid sick leave for 6 different reasons. One of the reasons is the same reason I just mentioned that's covered by the expanded FMLA, and the exemption for small businesses applies to that reason. The small business exemption does not apply to the other 5 possible reasons for paid sick leave. Again, it's not 12 weeks, it's only up to 2. And the other reasons for emergency paid sick leave are because an employee can't work because they've been subject to a government quarantine or isolation order. The employee's been advised by their healthcare provider to self-quarantine. The employee has symptoms of the coronavirus and is seeking a medical diagnosis. And the employee needs leave in order to care for someone who has been themselves subject to a quarantine or isolation order or advised by their healthcare provider to self-quarantine. As I mentioned, the Department of Labor just last week issued regulations to clarify a few points. So I'm going to just hit a couple highlights, and then so we have some time for questions. Work must be available. So if you have laid off or furloughed employees or shut down operations altogether, those employees are not entitled to paid leave. The leave is only available if you have work available for them, and then they are not unable to perform that work for one of the reasons I just mentioned. The leave to care for a son or daughter who is home because their school has closed or care provider is unavailable is only available to employees if no other suitable person is available. So how you're going to go about having your employees prove that is a question, but that's a conversation to have for employees who are asking for this kind of leave, and they need to represent to you and put it in writing. That's one of the pieces of documentation you need to maintain, is they need to make a representation that they have no one else that is available to care for the child. The regulations also cover topics such as the use of this leave on an intermittent basis, maybe one day here, one day there, versus over a continuous period of time. And helpful to employers is that employees can only take it intermittently if the employer approves. Those are my big highlights on the FFCRA. I'm gonna, before I switch to my other topic, just checking the chat. I'm not seeing any questions on that, so I'll go ahead and move on to another frequent topic that I am having conversations with clients about, and that is staff reductions. Many businesses, unfortunately, are in a position of reducing staff in some fashion, be that a layoff or a furlough. I think one of the questions that came in ahead of time was, what's the difference between a layoff and a furlough? And if you are not unionized, there's flexibility in terms of how you want to define those. Typically, a layoff is something that is more permanent, or a full, somebody is off work entirely for either a defined period of time or indefinitely, whereas a furlough is a reduction somehow. Perhaps they're working fewer hours a day or fewer days per week. And there are many different ways to slice the pie in terms of how organizations might need to change up their staffing in order to reduce costs. And that's really a business decision to make, but in making those decisions, I'm encouraging all organizations to keep in mind non-discrimination obligations. So think about how you will respond if and when down the road an employee challenges a layoff or a furlough decision, because perhaps all employees in a particular job title weren't laid off. And then the employee wants to know, well, why me? Why did my hours get cut? Or why did I get laid off when John over here did not? And you just need to make sure that you're thinking through your rationale for making those decisions, and you have objective, legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons, and document those, and communicate that to employees so that they understand what's going on, and that we're not just picking favorites and not picking, obviously you can't send all the women home and keep the men at work. That's clear and obvious discrimination. Those non-discrimination considerations should be taken into account also when you are returning individuals from furlough or layoff. I think I saw this in one of the questions that came in ahead of this webinar as well. Perhaps you had that employee that you weren't a big fan of altogether, or maybe we're on the cusp of letting them go anyway, and now everybody's laid off, and when it comes time to bring people back to work, there are perhaps a few people that you would rather not bring back. And that's going to be a pretty fact-specific analysis, but the broad brush is if you had legitimate non-discriminatory reasons for letting that person go in the first place, you're not obligated to continue to employ them after the layoff. So it would really be the same analysis that you would go through prior to termination. Have you gone through your disciplinary process? Have you documented? If this employee comes back and says, I think you chose not to bring me back to layoff because of my race or gender or age, how great is your documentation? Have you had conversations prior? How are you going to be able to establish that there was a legitimate non-discriminatory reason for not bringing that employee back? Another issue to think about when doing furloughs and layoffs are pay considerations. Who do you have to pay? Who do you not have to pay? As I mentioned, the FFCRA and those paid leave provisions do not come into the picture if you are laying people off. Those paid sick leave requirements only apply where you have worked for someone and they need leave. But you want to consider whether the person you're laying off or furloughing is salaried or hourly. For hourly employees, it's a lot easier. If they're not working, they don't need to be paid for the hours that they are working. If they are working at home, perhaps teleworking when they used to work on site, you want to make sure you have some real clear communication with the employee in terms of how are they going to track their time and report their hours worked, so that they are getting paid for all hours worked. And if you need to put in place restrictions so that they don't work beyond a certain number of hours, you want to communicate that to them in writing. If the individual is an exempt salaried person, don't forget the salary basis test that is part of that person being able to remain exempt. And so that means that they need to get paid their full salary for any work or any week in which they perform work. So if you are furloughing, for example, a salaried person and having them only work a couple days a week as opposed to the full week, you risk losing that exemption if you only pay them for certain days. One thing you can do is on a go forward basis, prospective basis, is convert them to hourly so that you're only paying for hours work. Or perhaps you just need to reduce their salary, which you can do that prospectively as well, as long as it is at least at the minimum level for the exemption, which is $684 a week. And then the very last thing I wanted to mention is the topic of screening employees for coronavirus. This is another topic where I'm going to direct you to a website for a lot more detail, and it's the Ohio Department of Health's website, and they have on that website guidance for screening employees. Actually, the link here that I have is long. I'm not going to try to read the whole website, but if you do a Google search for ODH screening employees for COVID-19, you will find that guidance, and it's really helpful. One note is that it's guidance only. It is not an order. It's not a requirement, but I would strongly encourage everyone to follow it as best you can. And that's the guidance that instructs you that if you are having any employees come to work on site at a physical location. Well, number one, that you let people work at home if at all possible. So if that's not possible and you are an essential business and you have employees come into the work site, have them take their temperature. You can also take the temperature, but I think it's easier, honestly, just to have employees take their own temperature and report to you if it's 100.4 or higher. And then that ODH guidance goes into a lot of detail on what to do if someone's temperature is above that threshold in terms of sending them home. And then it provides some alternatives to it. If temperature taking is just not feasible, there are other screening questions that you can ask employees. And then just keep in mind that if you do have someone who tests positive or who has symptoms or who has an elevated temperature and you're sending them home, give some thought to what your communication plan is going to be in your organization. Be mindful of that employee's confidentiality under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You're required to keep medical information about employees confidential. So you want to avoid sharing with any other employees that identifying the sick employee by name, but you do need to, especially if you have somebody who tests positive and they were at work, provide some notification to the rest of your employees. And you can do that by simply saying, somebody who works in this area who was reported to work has tested positive. And again, I think that ODH guidance is helpful in that respect. So that's it for me at a high level. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Liz, one of the questions, and this might not be in your area, but maybe John or somebody else can step in, is I got a text message and people are wondering about the $600 unemployment amount.
Yeah. We don't work for Ohio Jobs and Family Services. Okay. So, but this is information that we have garnered because a lot of our people have employees. You have to make at least $263 a week to qualify. So a lot of part-timers are finding themselves being not qualifying to get the unemployment. The $600 is based on essentially that supposed to be that $263 a week or better, up to like the $600 range a week, where if they file and are approved through Jobs and Family Services, they can be granted up to $600 additional week for 4 months. That is through, like I said, through Jobs and Family Services. As of yesterday, when I talked to a couple directors, county directors, they're running behind, as you would imagine. A lot of people are filing for it. The computer system has crashed a couple times. In fact, there's been my recommendation is call early in the morning or close, later in the evening, because you'll often be told, due to high volume calls, we can't take a call right now. Please call back, and hung up on. So that's kind of how it is. But if you qualify, for instance, the average person who makes $36,000 a year under this new care package, if they qualify, could actually make roughly $50,000 a year. So they actually could be making more than they made than they would have made not working. So but that's, like I said, that I don't know all the details because we don't work for Jobs and Family Services. Other than that I do know that people are getting sometimes more money than they actually made by not working under the new plan but only for 4 months. Now, that may be some interesting problems for people like us, for instance, who, when you lay people off and if they qualify, if the governor were to allow you to go back to work and you could open up your doors, say end of May or 1st of June, and in the current law, the language doesn't require them to do weekly checkups on, applying for jobs or doing reports like they did under normal unemployment. So it could pose a problem until they work all those details out. I was told by the Washington County Jobs and Family Services, though, that if you call them back and they can work, that they should work. What that means, I'm not sure.
To be continued.
To be continued,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's one of those ones that's still kind of a unspoken area or defined area.
Yeah, it's and like I said, it could be one of those situations where people we may call our people back and say, well, we'll come back in October once we can't make $1,300 a week anymore. It's conceivable. I don't know yet. One more thing that I think that Elizabeth brought up that I do want to point out that I did not mention, if you qualify and you get the PPP and you base it on your current payroll, and then when you bring people back, you don't bring back all the people, and you lower your payroll, you lay off a couple people like you don't like them or something like that, that amount will not be forgivable because you lowered your payroll on purpose. So be aware of that.
So you don't
And I would just
necessarily have to bring back the same people. You just
No.
need to bring back the same number of people.
Maintain
Correct.
the same
Correct.
salary basis.
Yes.
And I would just add to on unemployment. I've been looking here now as we were talking, and I'm missing what they used to have, and I might just not be in the right spot. But I know the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services had some good Q&A and some good information available. At least they did at one point on their website, and there was a WARN Act. They were calling a WARN Act number. For employers, if you are laying people off and they might be eligible for unemployment, to provide that number. The number is 2,180. So I know that employees, if you do get through and they apply for benefits and you provide that number, my understanding is that is to help track and should expedite the processing of a claim. That the normal 7-day waiting period for unemployment that would apply in normal circumstances has been waived. And again, I know at one point, and I'm just not seeing it right now, but there was some good Q&A on ODJFS's website. And if I can find a specific link before the end of this webinar, I will provide it.
I'll also point out that we put in the chat room a couple websites that we were talking about for SBA government funding and also for Department of Labor. Those are in the chat room. Just direct everybody's attention to those if they want them.
Okay, and I did just find these couple websites too. There's one for claimants, or Q&As, I should say, one for claimants and one for employers. Both are jfs.ohio.gov/OUIO/ and then it's either coronavirus and employers.stm or coronavirus and UI.stm. I know that was lengthy. I'll try to type it into the chat here too.
Okay.
As we go.
Any more questions for Liz or Brock? Okay, thank you both. We're going to then the final section of this, and ours is not overly detailed, at least at this point. Scott Moyer and I are going to be talking about, the taxes and the stimulus payment and just some of the details that are now coming out about, opportunities to fund. Scott is a principal of the Wright Associates, and he's over in our Zanesville office. He's responsible for a multitude of financial tax and accounting services, and he's the director of our oil and gas services. He just recently became part of the COVID-19 specialized team for research and consultants, so that we can help also, in addition to the resources that are out there publicly, to be able to provide and help our clients not navigate this process. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott. He is going to talk about the stimulus checks, employee retention credit, and then the deferral of Social Security taxes. You ready, Scott? I think he's another one that has to unmute. Well, he might have got dropped.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, I was unmuted. I don't know what was going on. Sorry about all that. Thanks for the introduction, Maribeth. Thanks for everybody joining us. Thanks to the Cambridge Chamber for setting this up. Hope everybody is staying well out there. I'm going to hit the high levels of the three items that Maribeth described, and then we'll take questions at the end after Maribeth chimes in on her front. The economic impact payments. So those are going to be payments going out from the federal government for individuals filing single or married filing separate, and that made up to $75,000. That doesn't mean it stops at $75,000. After $75,000, for every 100, it's reduced by $5. So if you made, the way to look at it is it's fully capped out at $99,000 if you're a single filer or a married filing separate filer. You would be due $1,200 total for that. Married filing joint, it's up to $150,000, phased out completely at $198,000, and the total amount there is $2,400. You can also receive $500 for each qualifying child. The IRS, how will they know where to send the payment? They will send the payment if you elected to have your refunds direct deposited in 2019. They will send it to your bank account here within the next couple of weeks. If you have not filed your 19, they will base the numbers and your direct deposit info on the 2018 tax return. They will not go back to 17. So if you have not filed 18, we recommend you do so. What if you don't have direct deposit info entered in? There's going to be a web portal available in the weeks to come for individuals to go on and enter their bank account information so that they can receive refunds, or excuse me, so they can receive the economic impact payment. We've also heard a lot of rumors that people are just rushing to file, folks that just received Social Security or they're under the filing threshold. You don't need to rush and file. The IRS is going to look and see the folks who receive Social Security benefits from Form SSA-1099, and they will be notifying you, and you will be eligible for the $1,200 economic impact payment. That's about it on there. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, single, married, filing separate, up to $75,000, you receive $1,200. Up to $99,000 in that same category, the $1,200 slowly gets phased out. If you made $99,001, you would be completely phased out of the economic impact payment. And again, married filing joint filers, up to $150,000, $2,400 you would receive, and anything up to $198,001 you would be completely phased out. $500 for each qualifying child. The other items that we want to hit is the Social Security employer side payroll tax deferral. I'm not a fan of this. Trust taxes are very are viewed very important by the IRS. They have allowed, though, an employer to defer just the employer side of Social Security on payroll, 6.2% for the rest of 2020. and half of it would be due 12/31/2021. The other half due 12/31/2022. I urge caution with this. Trust taxes are a big deal. And again, like John and Cindy hit on early, the word deferral does not mean it just evaporates. You still owe the money. And if you don't pay trust taxes, not only is the business liable, but sometimes the person responsible for remitting the trust taxes also comes under scrutiny. So I caution you on this Social Security employer payroll tax deferral, but it is available. The last thing is the employee retention credit. And this is for folks who don't receive any money from the EIDL or the PPP. So if you get money from the EIDL or the PPP that John and Cindy mentioned earlier, you would not be eligible for the employee retention credit. The employee retention credit, to be eligible, the employer's business must be fully or partially suspended due to the COVID-19, or the employer's gross receipts fall below 50% versus the comparable quarter in 2019. The credit is 50% of the qualifying wages paid up to $10,000 per employee for wages after March 12, 2020 and before 1/1/2021. If you're an employer with less than 100, the credit is based on wages paid to employees regardless if they worked or not. If you are an employer with more than 100 employees, they must return to work. Excuse me, I have that backwards. If you're an employer with more than 100 employees, the credit is allowed only for wages paid to employees who did not work during the calendar year after March 12th. You can receive your credit when you file your quarterly Form 941 payroll reports. Those are the three items that I wanted to touch upon. I'll field questions at the end. I'll turn it over to Maribeth, who wanted to hit on a few other points.
Okay, and just to expand upon what Scott said about the deferral of the Social Security taxes, even if you feel that I'm a corporation, so therefore I'm protected, because it is a trust tax, there is not an entity. If you are the ones writing the paychecks, depositing the tax payments, they actually have encompassed all shareholders at one point in a case that we dealt with. So keep in mind that when you're dealing with trust taxes, because this is really comes out of the employee's pay, is required to be turned over. If that does not transpire, even as a separate legal entity, you can be held personally responsible. So do use caution in that. One of the questions that we do have that comes up, and at least at this point, is unemployment taxable? Yes, anybody receiving unemployment will be taxed on that, at least currently. And then finally, can I use my retirement plan? A lot of employers are going out with 401ks. A lot of employers are going out and making modifications to their plans to be able to put a provision in there for loans. The same thing would apply if you have an IRA. But to qualify, right now, if you take those out and you're under 59 and a half, you're subjected to a 10% penalty. That penalty is going to be waived, but you have to meet certain requirements, and they are going to require that you prove it. And that is that either you, your spouse, or a dependent must have tested positive for COVID-19. Or you must have experienced financial hardship due to layoff, furlough, or quarantine. So there does have some flexibility in that, but it is going to be required to be proved to be able to avoid the 10% penalty. There's also a refunding requirement. You have 3 years, a 3-year period in which to return the funds to either your 401k or to your IRA. But regardless, it will be taxed, and it will be taxed over that 3-year period. So the only part of the withdrawal, and that's up to $100,000, the only part of the withdrawal, it will avoid the additional 10% penalty. It is not going to avoid the tax. You're still going to have the tax liability, but it can be spread over a 3-year period. We had some questions that came in earlier prior to starting now. If a business has full-time employees and they have an SBA loan that covers payroll, can they apply for an SBA loan even if they're a subsidiary of a larger business?
That's a good question, and is the secondary business a nonprofit or a for-profit? The smaller business.
Larger business is a nonprofit.
The larger business is a nonprofit, but the smaller business,
it's also a nonprofit.
Oh, they're both nonprofits. Okay. Well, what happens is you have to, when you're applying for an EIDL, the majority owner or anybody that has 20% or higher interest in that nonprofit or whatever the business is has to sign off on it and agree to it. So what happens is if it's owned by another company, and here's where there's another phrase about controlling interest, because some people can be owned by another company, but they surrender complete control of it to another like the nonprofits themselves have a controlling board that makes these decisions. Did the major nonprofit own a piece of it and then give full control to the other nonprofit's controlling board? Essentially, that means that the controlling board for the smaller nonprofit can apply, but they still have to get permission from the ownership because they own whatever percent primary ownership of the nonprofit. So the answer is complicated. That requires some legal dancing, and the banks that you apply for PPP or the SBA will have to look at what the relationship is between those two. If the big corporation controls it completely, then it's considered part of that company and may not qualify at all. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So yeah, I know it is not an easy answer because you're kind of bringing a lot of convoluted things in, and that's going to have to be a legal decision made by somebody who makes more money than me.
And John, I know who asked that question, so I'll maybe put her in touch with you to have a further discussion.
Yeah, because we can work through the details, and then maybe I can get more advice brought in to because it is very complicated, and it can be a simple, quick answer, or it could be a very complicated based on that ownerships. And a lot of times they have these relationships for tax purposes so that they take advantage of the full tax write-offs, but then that also then turns around and can make it very difficult to navigate to get loans, because who's going to be responsible for what and who has to sign it? Ultimately, there has to be one person that's going to say, I agree to collateralize it or support it, or to sign off the debt. So that's what it boils down to oftentimes.
Okay. Joe, did you look at the list and see if there was anything that, I believe most everything else that we got free?
I see there's one more in the chat room.
Yes.
I'll look at the other list.
Okay. This has to do with an owner, a business owner that owns a salon, and they pay independent contractors, so they do not pay into unemployment.
Okay.
And you already addressed this, but if you would address it again, they had to join late. What funds are they eligible for?
Well, on the 10th, people who receive 1099s and people who are self-employed can start applying for the PPP.
And then their owner's draw, what
Yeah.
they take out as their own salary would be considered the payroll.
Right. Now, like I said, there is also some of the banks are taking not necessarily the owner's draw per se, because not everybody shows that, but they're taking the income made by the company up to $100,000, dividing it by 12, multiplying by that 2.5%. So,
Right. And each one of the independent contractors would be considered self-employed. Individuals.
So they would be applying for themselves.
Joe?
I think we've gone through all the questions that were presented before the call, and it looks like we've gone through everything on the chat. We have about 7
I would add one. Oh, I'm so sorry, Joe.
No, go
I
right
was gonna
ahead.
add one thing to that last question on unemployment, in the Q&A in the link that I provided in the chat room does address, I'm not sure if this was the question or not, but if the question is whether someone who is an independent contractor is eligible to apply and receive unemployment, the answer is no. They are not. But it goes on to, and maybe this is, Joe, what you were talking about, that explains the new federal pandemic unemployment assistance program will provide for up to 30 weeks of benefits to self-employed workers. And so that's where they get covered. But is that your understanding too, Joe?
Mm-hmm. We just have about 5 minutes left, so now's your opportunity. If you have any final questions, go ahead and present them in the chat room.
Okay, well, that hour and a half certainly went fast. A lot of information. We're glad that we were able to present this today. Joe, thank you and your team. Thank you for ABC Communications for helping us get all set up in the Zoom room. And I don't believe I forgot anyone. All the presenters, of course.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Bricker and Eckler, for allowing us to use your Zoom contractor, your membership there with that. We appreciate that a lot. And I'll just say from the Chamber's perspective, if any of the people on the call that participated today have any further issues or need any other help, please contact me, and we'll do another one of these if we have to. As things change and evolve, there might be more information. I don't know for sure, but please continue to reach out to us for support. And thank you.
Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.